For a long time, flight simulation was dominated by two platforms, FSX and its fork P3D, and X-Plane. Effectively a duopoly, neither platform had any real competition. Stagnation and mediocrity was the name of the game. Often add-ons were required to replace large parts of the sim just to get a slightly not as bad experience. In 2017, Dovetail released something new. Another FSX fork. However, it did have significantly better performance out of the box, and the new UI was quite nice. What started as a nominally better FSX fork started to become more and more ambitious in mission scripting and presentation. The addition of volumetric clouds was a massive game changer, enabling some true IMC scenarios. Coupled with the raindrops running down the canopy, it was a new level of immersion. Unfortunately, development ceased shortly after, before any momentum could be gained. Still, it showed there was a real interest in flight simulation that was simply dormant. Many were just waiting for an excuse to get back into the hobby. The momentum carried on with DCS, and 2 years later with the announcement of Microsoft Flight Sim. Despite this sim getting the rug pulled from underneath it, I truly feel like it finally got things moving in the right direction again. So in this video I've decided to review this sim and give some retroactive insight. Flight Sim World launched with Orbix textures integrated for free, which didn't drastically overhaul the visuals, but definitely helped. The ambient occlusion definitely helps, however, to really avoid the flat look FSX had, especially when combined with newer textures. Cascading shadows were a thing in FSX, but frankly they look so much better in FSW. Model detail and textures look quite excellent, definitely not 4K ready, but I think these planes still hold up. The biggest addition that I mentioned before was the volumetric clouds. I don't want to focus on these too much yet, but suffice it to say they really did have a massive impact at the time. Overall, besides the clouds, it's not drastically better than anything else in the market at the time. It does really shape up nicely though if you color correct it with reshade, however. The flight model in the sim is once again a lookup table. It does function extremely well, but again falls apart when you get to the stall. Overall for normal flight it's just fine though. It's for aerobatic simmers that it'll get in the way. Besides performance, the updated weather is really the claim to fame here. It absolutely captured my imagination when I taxied out to the runway with raindrops on the windshield and flying up into a cloud to slowly see everything around me disappear. Weather generally meant nothing in simulators, offering no real threat. But this was especially true with the clouds being rendered using sprites. At no point were you ever in danger. In this sim, the atmosphere isn't particularly dangerous. However, the clouds definitely add a significant threat, even if only visually. It's crazy to think how far we've come in 5 years. It's really hard to convey just how big of a deal this was back then. There's not much to say regarding the game's engine. It's another FSX fork. The avionics were overhauled for better performance, which was both a blessing and a curse as it made it impossible to port FSX products into the sim. DirectX 11 did allow for new features like volumetric clouds and object occlusion. The performance overall was better than FSX, but still the engine was incredibly dependent on a single thread. Stability was definitely better as well, but the sim still crashes from time to time on my modern rig. Looking back, the development of the sim was equally as interesting as it was cursed. It attracted a ton of attention during development. I felt like the entire sim community was taking a collective breath to see what it can do. The biggest issue was the lack of aircraft variety, which could have been fixed had the sim maintained momentum. Unfortunately, or fortunately with hindsight, that momentum ended abruptly with the Dovetail announcing that they would cease development. Given Microsoft Flight Sim released almost exactly 2 years later, I'm convinced those events are related. We've advanced what feels like decades in the span of only 5 years. Trying to convey the hope the sim offered is nearly impossible to new simmers today. I look back on the sim fondly not because of what it accomplished, but because of what it started in motion.